Baldur's Gate is a role-playing game that was developed by Bioware and published in 1998 by Interplay Entertainment. It is the first game in the Baldur's Gate series and takes place in the Forgotten Realms, a high fantasy campaign setting, using a modified version of the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition rules. Fallout had just captured players' imaginations a year prior and offered a post-apocalyptic playground. The game had sparked an enthusiasm for the RPG genre, setting the stage for Baldur's Gate to redefine the genre. The story of Baldur's Gate takes us back to 1995, when a small Canadian development studio called Bioware had just finished development of their first title, a mech game called Shattered Steel. Looking for a new project for the team to get their teeth into, RPGs were a natural choice since many of the team had been avid role players for many years, having grown up playing tabletop Dungeons & Dragons. As with Fallout, many of the Bioware team were big fans of the classic RPG, Wasteland. With the new advances in PC technology, the team were keen to create a new vision for Western role-playing games. Everybody and their dog was convinced that Western RPGs were dead, says Bioware co-founder Trent Oster. Bioware had humble beginnings. It really was two guys in the basement making video games, said Scott Gregg, Bioware's first official employee. I was actually the only experienced game developer in the house, says Oster. I had made one game. It's not like I knew the right way to do anything. By January 1996, Bioware were going places. To be precise, they had moved to a small office space above a restaurant. I particularly remember having to hold the bathroom door closed with your foot when you were going in, because it didn't actually latch, remembers Greg. Many of the previous role-playing games had relied on a tile system due to the limitations of the system they ran on. If you look back to the Ultima games, or pretty much any other role-playing game at this point, Greg says, the artists would make tiles. These were all laid out on a grid, and they would assemble the background by just reusing all these pieces. Greg experimented with Microsoft's newly released DirectX software development kit and came up with a way to import a custom, full-screen, scrollable background that he'd painted in Photoshop. Instead of piecing together tiles, we could just paint whatever we want on here, and then we could just smoothly scroll around and have the characters walk on it. After showing his proposed alternative to tiles, his fellow developer asked, "How many CDs will that be?" Greg pulled out a calculator to figure out the storage requirements. "It probably won't be more than 4 or 5, replied Greg. It goes to show some of the power of actually having fresh ideas and inexperience in there, because we didn't know that it couldn't be done, so we just went ahead and did it. The initial game Bioware looked to create was originally called Battleground Infinity. A demo was hastily put together and failed to impress. There was, however, one person who did take an interest in Bioware's pitch. Feargus Urquhart had just created Black Isle Studios, which were part of Interplay. Interplay had recently acquired the license to develop Dungeons & Dragons games. Part of Bioware's pitch for Battleground Infinity had been, it's kind of like D&D. As Lucas Christiansen put it, Interplay just said, well, why don't you make it Dungeons & Dragons? The new game was green-lit, and Forgotten Realms was now the developer's playground.
Or late 94, early, I don't remember.
You're working for Bioware.
No, I was working for Interplay.
Oh, working for Interplay.
So Interplay published Shattered Steel, okay. And so I was the Interplay producer, and that's how I met Ray and Greg.
Okay.
To start off, and I was their producer. I wrote all the voiceover for it. I wrote all this kind of basically the layout, the I guess the screenplay for all the CG movies. I designed some of the weapons, and I spent a lot of time in Canada. So it was funny. I was actually, for me, working on Shattered Steel was the first time I ever went to Canada.
The game would take the team of 15 developers 3 years to make. The naive team went into the project unhindered by experience and allowed their imagination to shape a completely new kind of gaming experience, one that would come to define the Western RPG. With the emergence of new games like Warcraft and Command & Conquer, Bioware saw an opportunity to bring the more modern mouse control of these games to RPGs. Mixing real-time management of up to 5 party members with the complexity of the D&D rule set made the action chaotic. It became pretty obvious pretty quick that there was no way you were going to be able to play the depths of D&D in real time without ever pausing the game, Oster says. That's when we came up with a pause and play plan. That addition enabled players to stop in the middle of the game, queue up commands to their party, and then restart the real-time action. Although Baldur's Gate didn't invent this active pause approach, it did help popularize it. For Chris Jansen, the key to making the story sing was capturing the feeling of sitting around a kitchen table with a group of friends and bringing it to a computer game that was playable solo.
Definitely one of my favorite series. I'm wondering, did you have, how was this? Was it just publishing, or did you have an influence over the development of the games?
So the original Baldur's Gate, I would say it was. They made the game, but it was fairly. There was a lot of collaboration going on. It was one of their first games, and certain kind of little bits of technology that Interplay had. Like we gave them the Fallout source. They didn't use Fallout engine at all, but we sent all the Fallout source code and stuff over so they could see how we did stuff with Fallout, or we're doing stuff with Fallout. And we were up there a ton and reviewing all the design documents, but also at the time, TSR was pretty involved as well, from a standpoint of the dialogue and the fiction and all that kind of things. And so we were we're all up at Bioware a number of times. I was at Bioware a ton, but also TSR was up there. But all in all, the thing is they had the idea. They had the idea, and they'd already prototyped it and put it together of so this RTS style thing. Now that's what they had pitched me. They pitched me this game called Battleground Infinity. My part in it was, my part in it was saying, well, that looks really cool. We have this D&D license. Why don't we stick them together? And then my only other part in it really was at the time, so then I got a demo from the first demo I got from them was eh. The second demo I got, I was like, okay, I can see this. I really can see, it was still Battleground Infinity. It wasn't Baldur's Gate yet. And I was like, okay, I can see this game. I can see how this. Showed it to my boss. He said, no. And I was like, no, I'm not going to take that, and I'm not going to. And so I was pretty good friends with the VP of marketing. And so I got it up and running on one of the programmers' computers, and I had her come over, and I said, so she goes, okay, I'm going to show this. And I go, it's still early, but just think, this is D&D. Think of it like it's something like an RTS, but it's going to be a role-playing game. It's totally, blah, blah, blah. And I gave the spiel, and she looked at it, and for not being much of a gamer, she put the 2 and 2 together as well. And she just picked up my programmer's phone, called Brian and said, Brian, come up here and look at this thing. Brian came up, looked at it, and says, sign it. And
just like that.
And that's how Baldur's Gate got started,
For Interplay, Baldur's Gate didn't project to be a massive seller. The publisher's previous D&D titles hadn't been blockbusters, and neither Baldur's Gate nor Bioware had a built-in brand. So Interplay wasn't planning a full marketing campaign. They were doing their standard promotion thing, which at that point was, you take out a bunch of ads a couple months before the game comes out in some various magazines like PC Gamer. And that's pretty much it, Greg says. We had been putting our heart and soul into this thing, and it's you've got to do something better than that. Baldur's Gate became the best-selling game in the 2 weeks following its release, moving 175,000 copies in that time. It topped 500,000 by the end of February and hit the 1.5 million mark by May 2001. Baldur's Gate garnered Game of the Year and RPG of the Year honors from a multitude of outlets. Bioware's output over the past 20 years owes a debt to that first, formative RPG. Baldur's Gate literally set up every game that Bioware ever made, Oster says. Star Wars, Knights of the Old Republic, Mass Effect, Jade Empire, Dragon Age, they're all kind of from that original DNA. If you pull back from all the flashy bits and all the high-end graphics and all the cinematic conversation, there's a lot of similarities there. More than 20 years later, the world Baldur's Gate built is still expanding. If you're lucky, you get to take some of all this stuff that inspired you, all the stuff you thought was great, and you build something that's worthy for someone else to build on whenever they come after you, Greg says. That is basically the best you can do as any type of artist.